Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to my session. We're going to talk about how we use watsonx in the community. I think most of you probably are familiar with the Tech Exchange community at community.ibm.com. So my company, Higher Logic, we power that for IBM. It's built on our software. We actually make online community software. We have a couple of different products depending on the use case, and companies like IBM might use both of them. But basically, it is a way for the members of the community, people with like interests and so forth, to connect online. So just a little background on it, and we'll jump into the kind of the tech stuff. This is a pretty tech heavy presentation, but since it's Tech Exchange, I assume that most people are expecting that. Anyway, so the community is really kind of in the center of customer engagement and support. Essentially, it's a place for people to go and talk to each other, ask questions, get answers, share documents, share videos, write blogs, that kind of thing. So if you're at all familiar with Tech Exchange, that's a great example of what is typical. IBM doesn't do as much in terms of the case deflection thing. I think it's much more of a gathering place for technologists to share, but in a lot of cases, our customers use it as a place to go first to get answers, or if you can't get answers from support, to ask your fellow users of software or users of whatever product it is that our customer is selling. And in doing so, you build up a knowledge base, right? And so what I want to talk about today is sort of how that knowledge base gets used in the future with AI. So I'm going to do a little bit of background talk on the technology and how we got there, and I'll show it to you. And then at the end, I'll have time for questions. So the first thing that we're doing, and IBM was our sort of alpha beta on this, is building what we call a RAG bot. So it's a chat bot, and I'm sure you're familiar with using chat bots, but we use retrieval augmented generation to give answers to the questions asked of the bot. So you can go in ChatGPT, for example, or whatever, and you can ask it questions. And I guess actually probably 6 months ago, it would answer from its knowledge on what it was trained on. So there's a model underlying ChatGPT, an LLM called GPT-4. And when you ask the chatbot questions 6 months ago, let's say, it would answer questions based on the knowledge that it was trained with. After that, they implemented retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. I'm not sure exactly when they did it, but the idea there is it can answer questions based on its knowledge, but it can also answer questions on external sources. And so when we think of RAG, we think of authoritative knowledge bases outside of the training, right? So in the case of the community for Tech Exchange, it is all the Q&A and sharing and everything that everyone has done in the community over the past, I don't know, many, many years. And so it can answer questions based on its knowledge, but also based on all the knowledge that you all have shared in the community over those years. And the way it works, is this thing called embeddings. So basically, there's two sort of types of search. So essentially, what it does is it runs a search, gets answers back, and then synthesizes the answer to the question based on the answers that came back from the search. And the old style search, we call lexical search, is more word-based. Like if I ask it a question, and Google sort of works this way, where it's kind of the words you use that determine what content comes back in a Google search. And I'm sure they're more sophisticated than that. I'm simplifying just for illustrative purposes, but you would go in, and we've all been trained to search Google a certain way, right? If I know I want a document and I want these specific words to appear next to each other, Google's awesome at that. If I know there's sort of a word that's rarely used, it's great at that. And it is really based on proximity of words, synonyms, all those kinds of things. Those sort of lexical searches are. Embeddings-based search is more conceptual. And so the way I explain it when I'm talking to non-technical people is sort of this little face thing on the my left. I'm assuming it's on your left or right. I'm not sure. Anyway, and if you're probably familiar with this Face ID, like we use Face ID on your iPhone or your Android or whatever. It doesn't like take a picture of your face and say, oh, this picture matches this other picture. It turns your face into a vector-based diagram, sort of like this thing looks, right? And so there's points and directions and all that kind of stuff. And it's really actually numbers in n dimensions, right? So a face is probably pretty simple, and it's in 3 dimensions. And it just has points that it picks that are sort of important in your face, and sort of the how far apart they are and what direction they go, and how far in 3D they go, and it stores that. And so then when it goes to sign in with your Face ID again, it says, oh, okay, I'm going to recalculate this, and it's going to be pretty close. Like I might be wearing glasses today and not tomorrow. I might have grown a beard or whatever. It's good enough that it knows, okay, yeah, that's the same face, right? And so that's sort of how embeddings-based search works, or making embeddings on the things you're searching for. So the other illustration here is still very, very much simplified for how it works, but this one is kind of showing like a word, orange, that's Higher Logic's logo color, and how it relates to other words in the English language, right? So it's pretty close to downtown, I'm not sure why, Milwaukee, gray, obviously, beach, right? So this comes from a thing called TensorFlow, which you can go in and type in a word or a phrase, and it will show you how it relates in this rotating 3D model. So it's doing it in 3D. The real way it works is what they call n-dimensional, right? And so it's like you can picture any word or phrase or concept, and it can be turned into these vectors and stored that way. And that way, when it does a search, it actually does the search with numbers, which makes it fast. It sort of embeds a whole concept, which makes it typically better results for search, especially the way we're using it. And it also removes language barriers. So if you take something in English and you vectorize it, and then the search is done in French and it vectorizes the search, the comparison will still work, right? Because even though those 2 languages would be different in a lexical search where the words are different, they'll map to the same thing conceptually in one of these types of searches. So we've switched our search, we're in the process of switching our search over to embeddings-based, and that works a lot better with today's AI. So that was kind of step 1 of our project. And so to kind of illustrate this, what happens in the community is people post questions and answers and blogs, and they upload files, and they write articles, they do all these kinds of things. And those are the sources of data, or the content, right? So the content comes in, we chunk it if it's big. So if it's something like a question or an answer to a question in a thread of discussion, they're typically not big enough. We need to chunk them. But what we've discovered, and by we, I mean the world, not necessarily me and my team, but is that the smaller, you need to get the chunk the right size, because if it's too big, like if I represented a 100-page document with one set of vectors, it would not be very accurate. And if I go too small of a chunk, then it represents too granular of a concept to be very useful. So sort of the chunking strategy and sizing is a big part of the first step in making these things work. So if I have a 100-page document, something like a paragraph might make sense. A section, a chapter would be too big, right? So you chunk it, you do this embeddings, right, which turns it into the little face-looking thing in sort of concept. And the embeddings model does that, right? So there's a piece that does the chunking, there's a piece that does the model that does the conversion to this embedding, and then those chunks are stored in a search engine. In our case, we use Elasticsearch implementation within watsonx. So IBM has created a whole bunch of tools inside of watsonx, the broader product line. And one of those is Elasticsearch. They call it Discovery, I think, as their product. We use sort of a slightly different version than the out-of-the-box Discovery to make this thing work, but it is using all of the sort of the watsonx tuning on that. So those chunks get stuck into the search engine. Then what happens is a user comes in and they write a question, right? So they're not doing generally the search type thing you would do on Google, where the sentence doesn't make sense, right? You're actually asking a question in English or whatever language. It then takes that, the embedding model, same embedding model, converts that to vectors, and it runs that against the vector-based search. So Elasticsearch has vector-based storage and vector-based search. So it does that search. It comes out with the chunks that answer the question. So that goes over to this matching content part, right? And so it has that metadata about the thing, which might be like security or tags, or basically facets. That information comes over. The actual vector information comes over, and then the metadata and text around each chunk comes over, and then that goes back through the user input prompt template, and an LLM comes and says, okay, here are the pieces of content that matched the question. And now this LLM is saying, all right, let me try and answer this question based on, I know the question, I know the prompt that, in this case, Higher Logic has surrounded that with, right, where we're giving it a whole bunch of instructions, which I'll show you in a minute. And then these are the documents that matched the question from the search, and I'm going to use all that information together to synthesize an answer, right? So this is kind of the flow of RAG, and this is essentially the flow we use to build this thing. So then we go on, and so this is an example of what a piece of our prompt looks like. So you'll see it says, put them in its role. You're a search assistant for the IBM Tech Exchange community. You formulate answers to answer inquiries using information found in the available documents. Use the search resources function to retrieve excerpts from documents. And I won't read the whole thing, but basically what we're telling it is how it should think. We're limiting its thinking because an LLM, a large LLM, has basically all the knowledge in the world that's not protected or copyrighted. So it's got all this knowledge. And we have to say, you're a search assistant, you know a lot about IBM, and you can use this search resources function to gather more information to use to answer the question. So the search resources function is something where part of our setup, when we tell the LLM what to do, we say, hey, you've got access to this function called search resources. What it does is it runs a search against a search engine full of content that could answer your question, right? So this is a whole other prompt that we're putting together. And then we have this function, search resources, that we've written that goes against Elastic, right? So basically, you're talking to the LLM, telling it, if you can answer the question with what you already know, great. But here's this other resource you have, and we can add multiples. These are called tools. We can have multiple of these tools when we set up the LLM to say, here's the tools available to you, and you figure out when you need them. And when you need them, just call us back. And you'll call us back with the concept, the query, the question that the user is asking, right? So that's the bottom talks about evaluate the user's inquiry, determine if an answer can be formulated given the current conversation, or it actually says, or knowledge you happen to have about IBM's products and services, right? And then if the answer to the inquiry can be formulated using only that information, provide it. Otherwise, call the search resources function to get potentially relevant documents. And then it gets into some technology, and I guess it is like half the prompt that is just this part of the prompt, and there's other parts of the prompt like the tools, etc. But return it in JSON with a simple answer and the resource IDs. And so what we'll do then is when it answers, we will then use the resource IDs to point to the original documents that it used to make its answer, and we'll show the answer to the user, right? And so I'll demo that. By the way, if you have questions, ask them in the chat, and I will jump in and answer them. But with no questions so far, I'll jump into the demo. So let's see. So this is the Tech Exchange. Let me just make sure I'm still logged in. Okay, so I'm going to ask it simple questions. What is watsonx.ai? Okay, and this is doing two things. It's doing the old school lexical search, which you'll see at the bottom. And so you'll see here it came up with 166,000 results, because the way that simple one works, and I'll scroll down to it for a second, is it's really using these words. What is watsonx AI? And it is still pretty good. It knows, this first one has what is in it, and it has watsonx AI as a tag. It's probably got a lot of content about watsonx AI. And so that style is, does it have the words I'm looking for? And how many times are they used? Are they used next to each other? Are synonyms used, etc.? So it's saying this is the most likely best blog entry here. There's another one about, there's a whole library of watsonx AI stuff, some announcements, right? So it's found some stuff like you'd expect Google to give you, and probably the top ones of all you care about. It found 166,000. I don't know about you, but mostly I don't look beyond the first 5 or 10. But that's old school search, and we will probably replace this with the semantic search. But it has cool features like, you know, this faceting, right? There's 517 announcements, 23,000 blogs, 108,000 discussion threads, right? So it's giving me that. But a totally separate search was run using this conceptual search or embeddings-based search, and it came up with just 3 answers. And these 3 look really relevant, like a next generation studio for generative AI. Actually, those 2 say the same thing. It's probably 2 different things, but generally available. And it's synthesized an answer to my question. So, you know, I'm sure everyone has used ChatGPT or Gemini or, you know, one of those tools, Copilot, and is used to this, right? So it shows me this over here. It's showing me the references it's got, and it's only showing me 3 or 4. I think we told it to limit it to 4. So if I want to dig in more, I can hit this little AI search thing, and it pops up my little conversation. By the way, we're changing the UI. This is kind of V1. I'll talk about that in a second. But I might say, does it use multiple LLMs? And we'll see what it says. Every time you run this thing, it's a little bit different. AIs are what they call non-deterministic, right? So it's going to potentially give me a different answer than it gave me last time I tried this, but it's pretty good. So it's saying, yes, it uses multiple LLMs and gets stuff from Hugging Face and all this kind of stuff. And so I'll say, what are the most useful LLMs in this? It knows what this is, so it keeps track of the conversation, right? It knows I'm talking about watsonx AI, and hopefully it'll tell me some pretty cool stuff about that. And let's see, most useful: Granite, Llama, Minstrel, and Mixtral. Okay, so you know, there are a ton of them in there. We started when we first built this thing. We launched an alpha at the Tech Exchange conference in Las Vegas in October, and the alpha was using sort of a temporary version of Discovery that the client engineering team helped us set up, IBM's client engineering team. And so, you know, we set that up, we configured it. We had Llama, I think it was Llama 380 or 70 billion parameter version. And, you know, it was pretty decent. We didn't have the chunking strategy worked out fully, so we kind of didn't put in the large documents. So it only had maybe half the content that we would have wanted it to. It didn't have updates in real time or near real time. But it was a cool alpha, and we got a lot of people using it, a lot of feedback. We've since changed things up. So we've got a new production version of Elasticsearch up. We are just going to launch after this presentation. They didn't want to do it beforehand in case it messed up my webinar, on the Granite model. So what happens when we do these things is a lot of tweaking and tuning, and a lot of changes to the prompting and the tools and all that kind of stuff. So we've iterated on this. I don't know. We probably only released 3 versions to IBM's site that you see here, but internally we've iterated, you know, 50 times on this thing, changing the prompt, changing the model, etc. We ended up playing with it with different models and kind of figuring out the ins and outs of it. And then Granite came out kind of right around the time that we launched the alpha. And so we've been playing with Granite since, and we're launching it on Granite, like I said, today, switching it over. So super excited about that. It does a great job. It just, like I said, it took some tweaking and learning to get it to return the same stuff that the tweaking and learning from Llama gave us originally. We also played with OpenAI a little bit. through the Microsoft integration. But that, and it was good, but obviously Llama's faster, or not Llama, Granite is faster and cheaper, which we like, and it gives just as good a results. So that's much better for this kind of thing. But the other thing that we do, and getting back to community for a second, is we have this cool feature where we say, ask your fellow humans. So the idea of a community is it gathers kind of all the world's experts together, right? So if I go back to the community homepage here on the Tech Exchange, and I'll see that it has, this is going to count up to like 400 and some, 390,000 people. So there's about 400 communities inside the Tech Exchange that are basically associated with IBM's technologies, right? There's mainframe technologies, there's storage technologies, there's software, there's all the products that IBM makes, and each one of them has a community of people who use that product, right? And so if you're looking for information on a given IBM product, obviously you can ask IBM, but you can also ask other IBM users. And a lot of times that's a better way to do it, because IBM will give you, the company line, the marketing, but they'll also give you like, this is how we designed it, this is how it's used by our clients. But if you ask the clients, a lot of times they will have other answers, right? They'll have best practices that they've come up with. They've had, different combinations of products that are somewhat unique. Maybe IBM doesn't, have that combination that they support directly, but the clients do, and you can ask them. So what we kind of see happening in the community world is community, 390,000 posts, that's a lot. A lot of them are probably will be able to be answered by an AI. So you have, this bot that we've built, you have the all the training that it has internally on IBM's products and technologies and all that kind of stuff. And then that's all augmented with the 390,000 posts and the 530,000 posts and the blogs. There's like 50,000 blogs. There's all this great info that's augmented what IBM has produced and trained the model in, right? Or the model's been trained in, I should say. So going forward, we need new sources of content for the model, right? And so these discussions will still be available. And the nice thing about RAG is they're available pretty much immediately, like within a minute or two. The other advantage is that we can now say, well, if the AI can't do it, right? Getting back to this, we've just gathered 390,000 experts together in one place, right? So we can ask your fellow humans. So if I click on this, it's going to come back and say, oh, I'm going to create a thread. Now, the version that we're going to release in a few weeks will automatically draft the thread for you and choose the appropriate group, right? So if I drop this down, I'm only a member of 2, but there's 400 of them. It will say, well, this question should be asked in this particular place. And here, let me draft it from the conversation we've had, right? So if I'm looking at that conversation, I think I probably lost it while I was went forward and back, but I can ask it to draft me a post. Oh, it's still here. Okay. So I can say, let me go back into this guy. Well, some of it's still here. And I could say, something like, can you draft me a community post to ask the best LM, I'll change that, LLM to use for my project, right? Something like that. We're essentially going to do that in the background. So it'll be at the end, sort of a ask your fellow humans will be, all right, I didn't find the answer I wanted from the AI, right? It didn't have already this content in there through previous posts and Q&A and documents and so forth. It wasn't trained on it. Because it's something unique and I need an expert, right? IBM's got these champions who are great at answering questions. A lot of the content that comes from, that goes into this thing comes from the content that the champions put in. So we can now say, well, all right, I've gathered the 390,000 people. I don't know how many champions there are. There's hundreds, if not thousands. And we can post this question to them and go on. So that's the point, is combining the past corpus of information that's been created over the last many, many years in the community with the trained AI, with the AI's ability to understand questions, run sophisticated searches, gather relevant content, summarize it, and then post that back as an answer to the question. So all cool stuff that that this thing can do. If I go back now to my presentation, I just have one or two more slides. Let me find, by the way, the Q&A. Okay, there's still no Q&A. And so the next thing coming up, so there's a bunch of iterations we're going to do on this thing. So we've already done, multiple passes with chunking and setting up parameters in Elasticsearch and doing models and doing prompts and all that sort of stuff. We've added back in the security. So the original version didn't have any security because IBM's content's all public. We didn't need it for the alpha, but for most of our other clients, depending on your role, what products you have, all that sort of stuff would determine what you're able to see. So security is a big part of it. It's very, very granular in our product. Like I said, we got the chunking strategy going. We're putting granted in. We're switching to an internationalized model. So we were using one called ELSER, which is part of the Elasticsearch solution. And it's really good for English, and I guess probably pretty good for the Romance languages. But there's another one called E5, which is better for international languages. And since IBM is a huge international client or a huge international company, a lot of the content that we have in the community is in Japanese and Chinese and Arabic and things that are not, very close to what the English language looks like. And so there's a better model for doing the embeddings, which is this E5 model we're switching to. But then there's also other cool stuff to do, like adding contextual awareness. So if you're asking a question, we know who you are if you've logged into the community. So we can say, oh yeah, this person has these IBM products and is a mainframe developer or whatever. So the question is probably around, mainframe stuff or whatever, right? So if it just gives it more hints to the model, to the LLM to say, okay, this is what we know about this person to help guide it in getting a better question. And then the final thing that we're going to be adding is what I have on the screen here, which is all the agentic stuff. So I'm sure you've heard either today or in the past about the agentic models and all this kind of cool stuff it does. And this is kind of how we're visualizing it, where the same chat assistant will be talking to an agent orchestrator, which is kind of the we also call it a coordinator, but basically it understands your questions and it understands the capabilities of the level below it, which are these pools, we're calling them, and by we I mean the world calls them this, or actually maybe it's just AutoGen. We use this thing called AutoGen to do it. And early phases of this, because AutoGen's in like version 0.4 or something like that, but pretty cool stuff. And so one of the problems we have when answering complex questions or having a lot of capabilities is the bigger the context that the model is using to answer your question, sort of the farther off track it goes. And so we're doing this sort of, the agentic model allows for this sort of hierarchy. Like the top agent knows what the capabilities of the next level, and the next level knows the capabilities below it, and then that level knows capabilities below it. So here we're saying the orchestrator will ask, the events pool orchestrator, which will know it's got an event definition agent, which can do all these skills that are listed on the side there. And so by combining all of this, going out, having it do these, things broken down to smaller chunks and assembling them on the way up, you get better things done. And then these agents have capabilities to actually do things as well, not just answer questions, but actually create a session, create an event, all this kind of cool stuff. So the future is going around these lines, but the user interface tends to be this sort of, simple chatbot type thing. And I just have a couple simple slides, which I'll go through very fast. Like the new interface is not going to just be search. It'll be an assistant. You type in your question, whatever there, and it starts a whole conversation. You can pop this up at any time. We're doing all this cool branding stuff. So that's that all is coming. And that is all I have. And I don't think I got any questions. So feel free to reach out with questions. Contact me if they're sort of more technical in nature. I'm Rob at the top there. And then Paul from my team, if you have questions about the product or partnering or things like that, Paul is your guy. And that is all I have. Thank you so much for coming.